Good evening. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's nice that it's reasonably tempered outside. Before I get started and before we do a bit of a walk around, I wanted to thank first and foremost Canadian Clay and Glass for having me to do this exhibition. It's neat to flex muscles on the creative side of things and get a chance to show some of the nuances that I appreciate as being a maker. So thank you so very, very much. Bill Poole, of course, Sheila McMath, the proprietor staff, Sandy and Andrew. The Canadian Arts Council for the last 2 years has supported me in working with the bulk of the research that I've been engaged with. Willie, thank you as well. To Kao, Deanne, and Bruce, the three of them are going to be here tomorrow, and without them, I would have a different voice. Art Gallery of Burlington and the private collections that helped to pull the whole thing together. Medalta for the last 2 years, Idea Works, AMRC department with Mohawk College. You guys are brilliant, and it's amazing to be able to see high engineering mixed with classical clay process. It's really quite an exciting thing. Siemens Canada, Trillium Health Sciences in Mississauga, Clint Neufeld for his tutelage and ability to teach an old kind of well-centered maker into trying a completely different process with slip casting. Paul Leithwood, Alan Elder, and Flavio Belli for working on the current essay that's going to come out for this exhibition's catalog and for some of the editing. Jonathan Smith. Sorry, a bit of a hiccup. My mom and dad, and Andrew and Keaton. Thank you. So, craft is really quite exciting. We've got a whole landscape in front of us, and I have no idea where this energy is coming from because I'm merely part of the concrete at this point. We've got an incredible flow, and thank you so much. We've got an amazing body of people here that I'd love for everyone to come and see to the gallery, but to save us all from shuffling about and from making it awkward and looking at things, I want you over the course of the evening to really take a moment and walk through Kao, Deanne's, and Bruce's work to really get a feel for that grounding nature that they all have. And I'm not kidding when I say that this really is a creative landscape. From the coastlines through to the shorelines in Canada, we have a lot to celebrate in our 150th year. And there is a reason why I chose a lot of these pieces, from the dark, subtle browns to these coastal, rich turquoise that that Deanne brings out. It's really quite exciting to see what's potential, the potential of ceramics is in Canada. And we have a lot to celebrate. We have a lot to celebrate. So from that flow, from the harvest, the mentorship, flow, harvest, and then ferment. There's a lot that I've really started to appreciate, and I know a lot of us do, as collectors and as makers alike, and just simply appreciators of what goes into our Canadian content. From that flow and from that energy, I started with 12 moments, and there are 7 particular parts to this exhibition that I want to draw your attention to tonight. And it all starts with mentorship, flow, harvest, and ferment. From their flow, I came to 12 moments, curating my own flow, creating my own flow, and canonizing that flow with a teapot. And there is so much behind a teapot, not just simply with the technical prowess that they exert and that I'm inspired by, that a lot of us really appreciate that goes into an object, but the ability for it to act like an SLR camera. It takes a moment, and we're able to canonize that moment in one single entity and get it to push out all of those feelings that you had at that moment when you made it. And selfishly enough, I have to admit that this is really a bulk of who I am. From 1997, really inspired by Kao, pushing the boundaries of what a teapot is, pushing what it feels like to be overexposed, overused, untouched. This was my first indication that maybe violin is too high-strung, and maybe I can have a different audience and control the different genres that one can have, from Sheridan to my first and last firings in Japan, playing with the idea of teapot. The word for hand in Japanese is te. I'm playing, of course, with the idea of te being te and te pot. And enjoying that nuance in tea ceremony where it's hand to hand, when you really, really enjoy meeting that other person, even if it is just simply the feeling that you know that they're there and it's not the glimpse right in front of them. Clay has an amazing memory, and as makers, we know that that memory is dead serious. But the fact that it has a memory that can hold a story is beautiful. Coming back from Japan, I lived in Japan for 9 years. 7 years ago, when we first landed in Hamilton, Ontario, my first snapshot of the industrial landscape in Hamilton came to fruition with this canonized vessel. Moving through to working with Scott Barnum, really appreciating that completely different nuance in what it takes to be a proper maker and really put your whole self into your pieces, made me appreciate making things that I wasn't completely aware of. Do you mind if I go through these like this? So this was really quite exciting. This was a moment when I was encouraged, invited to take part in a wood firing. It's a 7-day, 24-hour wood fire near Punkadoodle Corners outside of New Hamburg, Ontario. And sadly, when I was in Japan, I didn't ever give myself the opportunity to go and enjoy the full length and the full breadth of what wood firing was about. And this teapot was in my first wood firing. The importance of this teapot is that what I didn't realize is that on the route to my shift at 11 o'clock at night, going along the dusty roads, I'd see this calligraphy on the side of the road. This beautiful shodo on the side of the road. I thought, what is that? That's fantastic. Pulled off to the side, and it was exploded tractor-truck trailer tires. And I thought, as we progress, as our highway culture does, we often forget about the things that are right underneath our feet, left at the side of the road, that for some moment in time, they carried the most precious of goods, to the point where they explode and left. And when I saw this, I thought, well, it's part of the journey now, isn't it? And it's really nothing more than that. Just simply working with your surroundings and allowing part of your processes and part of your journey to be canonized in a single vessel. You see where I am with the SLR. When that happened, I realized that Keaton really encouraged me to play with color, and I was very, very uncomfortable with my primary colors, and I'm not much of a drawer or a painter. But suddenly, I realized there's a chameleon effect that clay has, and this is where everything starts to make sense to me, where we start to look at surfaces that mimic metals, other objects, the ocean, meeting the sky, that suddenly there's a bit of a different dialogue between plastics, between the history of clay and textiles. What if a teapot becomes a red velvet teapot? Study. Playing further with wood firing, snails running through my garden in Japan. Then I realized that there was something of a struggle, and I think we're going to see this as soon as we go to the infinity bowls, that I was battling myself and playing with that nuance of what tea means and how many incredible decisions are made over tea. Becomes a bit of a pillow fight war, doesn't it? That it somehow sits there amongst the most important decisions that are made. Winston Churchill comes to mind. Make a pot of tea. Pillow fight warrior teapot. Red velvet teapot study. And when I really started playing and feeling comfortable with playing with the medium and surface treatment, my first installation, my first time in showing these pots, people would ask, oh, is that flocking? It's like, what's flocking? Well, it's nylon fiber, and you dust it on the pots, and it's fuzzy, it's great. It's like, nope, that's glaze. It's like, really? And they'd squeeze it. Thought, oh, this is interesting. I want that to be a squeeze toy. And it's amazing how things kind of progress as time goes on. So kind of like no theater, when you have a very elongated process until you get to the punchline. If you don't know of no theater, please do look it up. It's a very long, progressive dance and theater of sorts in Japan. decided to have a very similar feel between my velvet studies and the surface of being hard and actual flocking. And it was funny to see the same people come up and say, oh, your glazes are, oh, mother of, that's fantastic, that's flocked. Oh, I get it, Christopher Reid Flock ceramics. Oh, ha, 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 ha. And it just became this ongoing joke with myself and building on that audience of what's possible. In the middle of this floor here, what I was hoping to do with creating this space was creating something of a Zen garden, working with the architecture, but also working with what my feeling was towards working in ceramics, pulling off of my own creative flow. My first moments in Canada went through a sense of really trying to reconstitute myself as a Canadian maker. So coming off of that creative flow into the bowls, where I slowly, gradually realized that things were developing okay, that it really was starting to get louder, more pronounced, and more flavorful, more passionate. Suddenly the volume was ringing so hard that I had no idea. And after 39 years and coming back to Canada, I realized the importance of integrating and disintegrating the self, coming away from that individualistic proponent that propelled me into realizing something more than what was myself. And that entire 9 years in Japan, I realized that it was no longer myself, but I was integrating and disintegrating with part of our culture. And I realized even more, with the more importance and the growth that I felt over that period, it's okay to let go. It's okay to disintegrate. At that vulnerable moment, I found something very, very strange happening. Meeting Jim and Kimiko Koyanagi gave me the opportunity to get in touch with a 5,000-year-old ceramic vessel from Japan. And Jim approached me and said, would you like to study this for a couple of months? I spoke with Milosh Monix, and they said, we can't insure you to even look at that thing, let alone put that in your car. And so I decided that in doing so, it might as well push the limits, see what's possible. Met a really very interesting fellow, Robert Gertstein, out of Mohawk College, who helped me to see that rapid prototyping is something not to be feared, but something to make as part of process. So we decided that we'd try to make our ideas work. My first question to Robert and Tony Tharma from Mohawk College was to see, could we scan this piece? What's possible? So they both got very excited and said, oh, well, Trillium Health Sciences, they have a new CT scanner from Siemens. Let's go over there. Let's scan this thing. Let's see what happens. Wow, that's curious. So we took this 5,000-year-old Jomon vessel with Siemens over to Trillium Health Sciences and CT scanned the thing. Took the 15,000 files home. Robert had a look at them. I freaked out and realized that there was really something more after I had disintegrated myself. I'm at rock bottom, I might as well do something new. What is behind using something called ZBrush, which is a 3D file manipulation program? And with that period of several months, I taught myself, looked at a number of files, YouTube videos, to try and understand what is behind all of this file manipulation, until I came across a way in which to have a virtual mentorship up in the ethereal of things. Robert was kind enough to make sure that we had an identical replica created from our CT scans, a 3D sintered replica of a 5,000-year-old object. That blew me away. And then I realized that there were marks of process that were not only sintered in this, that would allow other generations to take the piece and learn from it, and maybe possibly into restorative sciences consider the other possibilities behind approaching these vessels. But it allowed me the selfish ability to play with it creatively. And I realized with plastic will only do one thing. as malleable as clay can be, what happens when you take a virtual glove and squeeze it and make it appear as plastic? squeeze toy da. I got very excited about making squeeze toys. Squeeze the form virtually and you get the lug to bubble up just as though it's a squeeze toy. Well, that's funny. So, Canada Council got very excited about that. Robert got very excited about that. We come around the corner here and we find 3 fully vitrified squeeze toys playing off of the nuance of simplified colors that through the tutelage with Clint Neufeld, we managed, with the help of Mohawk College, to create a 4 and a quarter foot tall Jomon squeeze toy. Fully sintered plastic in a $1.5 million EOS 3D sintering machine that's used for high caliber engineering. And that's really interesting, bridging the gap between high technology and classical clay process. So going into the shard pile of process and meeting with Clint, started working, deciding and trying to understand what goes into mold making. I'm not a mold maker, I'm not a slip caster, but I am a maker, and I have full capability of learning as all of us do. So what happens with that? You make, out of 46 components from that sintered object, 16 individual molds, some of them 15 pounds, some 300 pounds, filling them with slip, firing them, putting them back together, making them look like plastic again. It's kind of like clay thumbing its nose at plastic and saying, see, you were wrong. And I love that dialogue. That whole harvest has allowed me to see something that I didn't anticipate, and I think that coming to a conclusion of exactly what the whole process is about and what Keo, Deanne, and Bruce have taught me about is basking in your own element. Not just yourself as a maker, but basking in the element that you are presented with. And that led to an entire series of playing with clay and presenting it as something other than it's not. But also allowing ourselves to push beyond our creative and sometimes difficult comfort zones and trying something new and not being afraid to do that. To be continued. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks very much, guys. See you again.